The dining room chandelier was bright as a stage, but my chair was gone. I was banished to the garage, next to the turkey freezer. Just as the door clicked shut, I heard a cane tap 3 times on the hardwood floor. My grandfather, the man who sold his first oil field for the family's freedom, asked loudly, "Where's the girl?" My stepmother froze. I knew then. This wasn't dinner, it was a hearing. My name is Riley Hart. I am 31 years old, and I live in Denver, by trade. I'm a senior risk analyst at Atlas Ridge Advisory. My job is to look at a complex system, find the structural weaknesses, and calculate the cost of failure. I predict ruin. It's a skill I've unfortunately had to apply to my own life. For years, I have been the primary financial support for my father, Graham, and my stepmother, Vivian. He's 62. She's 49. When my father lost his executive position during the big downsizing wave a few years back, I stepped in. What was supposed to be a 6-month bridge became a permanent dependency. Then there is my half-sister, Sloane. She is 24 and exists in a different emotional economy than the rest of us. Sloane is the golden child, the one for whom excuses are always made and checks are always written, though rarely by her. She is Vivian's masterpiece, and my father's blind spot. Thanksgiving was always held at their home in Lakefield, the sprawling suburban mansion that my salary, not his pension, kept afloat. Vivian insisted on maintaining appearances. When I drove up, the place was professionally lit, massive, tasteful wreaths with velvet bows hung on every window, and the landscaping lights made the frost on the lawn look like scattered diamonds. It was beautiful, expensive, and sterile. The air inside, I knew, would be just as cold. The invitation itself had been an afterthought. It arrived via text message only 3 days ago, well after I knew the caterers had been booked. Vivian's message was brief. "We're finalizing the count. You're included. 4 p.m. Please dress casually." Casually, that was new. Vivian lived for formal attire. Casual was a power move. It was meant to unbalance me, to make me second guess. Was it actually casual, or was it casual in the way that meant effortless luxury, designed to make my Denver professional wardrobe look inadequate? I settled on dark jeans and a cashmere sweater. I arrived at 3:15. I came early, as I always did, assuming I'd be put to work chopping vegetables or polishing silver. I used my old key on the side door. Stepping into the mudroom, the smell of roasting herbs and expensive wine hit me immediately. Vivian intercepted me before I even reached the kitchen. She was wearing a silk blouse and pearls. So much for casual. "Riley, you're here." It wasn't a greeting. It was an observation of a problem. "I came to help," I said, holding up the bottle of Pinot Grigio I'd brought, which felt suddenly cheap. "That won't be necessary. The staff has everything handled." She didn't look at me, already glancing past my shoulder toward the main hall. "Actually, we've had a slight seating crisis. The dining room is completely full." I waited. I knew this rhythm. "We're just so overwhelmed with guests this year," she continued, her voice dripping with false regret. "We've set up a little overflow spot for you, just temporarily, until the main course settles down." She gestured not toward the living room, but to the door leading out of the mudroom, the one to the garage. "You want me to wait in the garage?" "It's heated, Riley. Don't be dramatic," she smiled, a tight, bloodless expression. "It's just until we can rearrange." I opened the door. The garage was cold. It smelled of motor oil and fertilizer. In the third bay, clear of my dad's Lexus and Sloane's new convertible, was a metal folding table. On it sat a single paper plate, a roll of paper towels, and a plastic fork. It was a setup for a dog you didn't like. I looked back at Vivian. She was already walking away, her heels clicking on the tile. "We'll call you if we need anything." The door shut, leaving me in the humming silence of the 3-car garage, staring at my seat next to a large white chest freezer. I sat down on the metal folding chair. The concrete floor leached the warmth from my feet. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Vivian. Text 1. "Riley, I am still waiting for the transfer." My jaw tightened. This was the real reason for the garage. Punishment. My phone buzzed again. Text 2. The caterer's final invoice is due tonight. $12,000. Text 3. I need that party overhead covered. Riley, this is embarrassing. Don't make me ask again. $12,000. Party overhead. I looked at the paper plate. I opened my banking app. The transfer screen stared back at me. My finger hovered over the button. For 3 years, I had pressed send. I paid for the mortgage on this house. I paid for the property taxes. I paid for the catering, the landscaping, the pearls on Vivian's neck, and the convertible in the next bay. But 3 months ago, something in me had finally broken. The analyst in me took over. I stopped seeing it as family help and started seeing it for what it was, a high-risk, non-performing asset. I spent a weekend building a new spreadsheet, not the one I shared with them, the real one. I calculated the burn rate. I saw the projections. I was 31 years old, and I was being bled dry. So, 3 months ago, I made a change. I rerouted my direct deposits. I set up new automatic transfers, not to their account, but to my own high-yield savings and investment portfolios. I had stopped being the bank. I just hadn't told them yet. Today was supposed to be the day I explained my new boundaries. Vivian, it seemed, had sensed the shift in the financial winds and had decided on a preemptive strike. My phone buzzed again. Text 4. Answer me. I powered the phone off and slipped it back into my pocket. I would not be sending $12,000. The garage was her leverage. My refusal was mine. I sat in the cold for what felt like an hour. I could hear the muted sounds of the party through the walls. Laughter, the clinking of glasses, the bass line of some tasteful jazz. My phone vibrated again. I sighed, assuming it was Vivian's mounting rage, but it was a different name. Aunt Marla. Marla was my mother's sister. She was the only person in the family who saw the dynamic clearly. She was tough, unsentimental, and the only one Vivian was genuinely afraid of. The text was short. Marla. Grandfather is here. He wasn't on the list. Don't you dare leave that house. My blood went cold. Calvin Hart, my grandfather. Calvin Hart was 82 years old, a retired railroad tycoon who had built an empire from nothing. He was old money, but he'd made it himself, and he despised weakness and waste. He lived in Arizona and hadn't come to Thanksgiving in 5 years, claiming the Denver altitude was bad for his heart. His arrival meant one thing. He knew something. I stood up, my knees stiff from the cold. I walked to the door that connected the garage to the house. I didn't open it. I just listened. The murmur of the party died down instantly. The silence was absolute. And then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of his heavy, carved wooden cane hitting the oak floor of the main hall. It was a sound from my childhood, a sound that meant the patriarch had arrived, and all proceedings were to stop. I heard his voice, a low gravel that cut through the silence. He was in the dining room now. Graham, Vivian. Father Hart! Vivian's voice was suddenly high and breathless. What a surprise! We didn't know you were coming. Clearly, Calvin said. His tone was dry. I'm looking at the table. You've set a full house, but you seem to be missing one. Silence. I could picture the scene. My father, Graham, staring at his wineglass. Sloane, looking confusedly at her phone. Vivian, desperately trying to calculate this new variable. Then, my grandfather's voice, louder this time, resonating through the entire house. Where's the girl? I leaned my head against the cold metal door. Every eye in that room would be darting away, looking at the centerpieces, the walls, anywhere but at the old man at the head of the table. This wasn't a party anymore. This was an audit. It started, as most systemic rot does, with a request that seemed reasonable. It was just after the pandemic lockdowns lifted. Graham, my father, called me. His voice was strained, unfamiliar. He'd been restructured out of his job. It's just temporary, Riles, he'd said. his voice laced with a false optimism I hadn't yet learned to decode. "Just until I land the next big thing, the market is hot." I was at Atlas Ridge. I had just secured a major bonus, and I was still naive enough to believe in his resilience. "Of course, Dad, whatever you need." That temporary bridge loan was now 3 years long. The market, it turned out, wasn't hot for 60-year-old executives who felt entitled to a corner office. The bridge had become a permanent pipeline, and I was the source. Graham was the gateway, but Vivian, my stepmother, was the architect of the system. Her primary tool was her fragile health. It was a masterpiece of vagueness. She never had a single diagnosable illness, just a collection of expensive, recurring symptoms. There were palpitations that required monitoring, always flaring up when I was a day late on the mortgage transfer. There were sudden migraines that could only be cured by week-long spa retreats, billed to an American Express I paid the balance on. "My nerves are shot. Riley," she would sigh over the phone, her voice a delicate whisper. "The stress of managing this house, of keeping up appearances for your father's sake, it's taking a toll. I worry I might just collapse." The guilt was precise. It was weaponized. If I hesitated, if I suggested a budget, I wasn't just being frugal. I was actively damaging her health. I was risking my father's happiness. I was, in her subtle framing, failing the family. And then there was Sloan. Sloan was the primary beneficiary of this system. While I analyzed multi-million-dollar risk models in my Denver apartment, Sloan was curating a lifestyle. Last spring, her Instagram feed exploded with images from Santorini, her, in a white linen dress, laughing against a blue dome, the Aegean Sea sparkling behind her. The caption, "So blessed, worked so hard to make this dream happen. #self-made, #girlboss." I stared at the post on my phone, then looked at my credit card statement on my laptop. A $3,000 charge to Aegean Airlines, a $4,000 charge at a boutique hotel in Oya. She was self-made, funded entirely by my mandatory contributions to the Family Wellness Fund, as Vivian had started calling my money. The Family Wellness Fund covered everything. It became a black hole. I wasn't just paying the mortgage on the Lakefield house. I was funding a lifestyle I couldn't afford myself. The receipts, when I bothered to look at the itemized statements, were staggering. $400 for a single bottle of wine for Graham's collection, $800 for his quarterly golf club fees, Vivian's necessary therapeutic massages, which seemed to happen weekly. They didn't even hide it anymore. It was just absorbed into the cost of being Riley. I did try to say no. Once. It was about 6 months ago. Vivian had called needing an emergency $5,000. The landscaping, she insisted, was a disaster and needed a complete overhaul before a garden party she was hosting. I looked at my own finances. I was trying to max out my retirement contributions. "Vivian, I can't this month," I said, my stomach twisting. "It's just tight for me right now." The line went silent. It was a heavy, cold silence. "I see," she finally said. Her voice was ice. "It's good to know where we stand." 2 weeks later, it was my father's 62nd birthday. I called the house. No answer. I texted Graham. No reply. I drove to Lakefield after work. The same familiar bottle of Pinot Grigio in my hand. The house was dark. Confused, I checked Sloane's Instagram. There they were, Graham, Vivian, Sloane, and a dozen of their friends, all laughing at a trendy, expensive downtown steakhouse. Graham was blowing out candles on a massive cake. The caption, posted by Sloane, read, "Celebrating Dad with the real family." I had not been disinvited. I had simply been erased. Graham called me 2 days later, his voice brimming with apologies that were clearly crafted by Vivian. "We just didn't want to bother you, Riles," he'd said. "We know how busy you are, and you said money was tight. We didn't want you to feel obligated." The lesson was clear. Participation required payment. My seat at the table was conditional. The irony was how my father spoke of me when he wanted something, when we were alone. Usually when he needed a signature for a new car lease, I was co-signing. He'd put his arm around me. "You're the strong one. Riley," he'd say, his voice thick with counterfeit sincerity. "You're the pillar, the roof support for this whole family." He said it like a compliment, but a pillar isn't a person. A pillar doesn't get a seat at the table. It holds the table. It is structural, unseen, and expected to bear the load without cracking. He never said thank you. He said, "You're strong," which was just another way of saying, "You can handle more." Vivian preferred to formalize the theft. She sent long quarterly emails titled Hart Family Updates and Traditions. They were memos, structured like a corporate newsletter. She would detail Sloane's achievements, always social, Graham's projects, always expensive, and then, at the bottom, under a heading titled Household Stewardship, she would list the financial requirements for the next quarter. "To maintain the integrity of the Lakefield tradition," one read, "we will require a capital injection for the roof repairs and the annual association fees." It was never a request. It was a line item. She was integrating financial terms into the very definition of family. The arrogance grew. Their sense of entitlement became absolute. The smallest things spoke the loudest. "I pay for a premium family streaming plan, Netflix, HBO, the works." One night, back in my apartment in Denver, I tried to log into my own Netflix account. Incorrect password. I tried again, nothing. I clicked, forgot password. The recovery email wasn't mine. They had gone into my account, the one I paid for, and changed the primary email and password to Vivian's. It was such a small, petty theft, but the psychology behind it was glaring. They no longer saw it as my account that they were using. They saw it as their account, which I was merely privileged to pay for. It was the complete reversal of ownership. I called Aunt Marla, my mother's sister, raging about the Netflix account. I was furious, humiliated. "Of course they did," Marla said. Her voice was practical, devoid of pity. She was the only one who saw the system for what it was. "You're arguing about streaming passwords, Riley. While they're robbing you blind, stop arguing. Stop emotionalizing. You're an analyst, right? So analyze." "What am I supposed to do, Marla?" I asked, my voice cracking. "You stop talking," Marla said, her voice firm, "and you start keeping a log, every text, every email, every transfer. Treat it like a case file. You don't fight thieves by appealing to their conscience. You fight them with receipts." So I did. That night, I stopped being a daughter and became an auditor. I opened my banking portal. I set the filter. 36 months. I exported every statement, every credit card transaction, every Venmo, every Zelle, every wire transfer. It was hours of work. I sat at my kitchen table, the glow of the laptop illuminating stacks of paper. I built the spreadsheet I should have built 3 years ago. I categorized every single expense. Mortgage, utilities, car payments. Then, the other categories. Vivian, spa, wellness, salon, Graham, golf, wine, consulting lunches, Sloane, shopping, travel, startup costs for a lifestyle blog that had never published a single post. The numbers were horrifying. They had extracted hundreds of thousands of dollars from me. That's when I saw it. A series of cash transfers to Sloane, marked property taxes in the memo line. The dates were clustered, all within 1 week. I remembered Sloane posting a photo around that same time. A new boyfriend, a manicured hand held up to his chest, on her finger, a diamond ring, a very large, very real diamond ring. The caption, "He spoils me, just kidding, I spoil myself, #independent. I looked at the dates on my spreadsheet. The final transfer for property taxes went through on a Tuesday. The ring appeared on her Instagram that Friday. My property tax money. I closed the laptop. The sun was coming up over Denver. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt cold. I felt the sharp, clean clarity of absolute data. Marla was right. This wasn't about money. Not really. It wasn't about love or family or tradition. It was about a role. They had assigned me a role without my consent. I was the utility. I was the infrastructure. I was the silent, uncomplaining source from which all blessings flowed. My father, to maintain his pride, needed to believe he was still a provider, which required a silent partner. Vivian, to maintain her status, needed a revenue stream she didn't have to work for. Sloane, to maintain her image, needed a bank that never asked questions. My entire function in this family was to fund their delusions. My silence was their oxygen. My compliance was their collateral. And as I sat there in the garage, listening to the door rattle slightly as the wind picked up, I understood. The garage, the paper plate, the $12,000 demand, it wasn't just an insult. It was a system check. They were testing the pipeline because they sensed the flow was stopping. They were reminding me of my role. I was the pillar, and pillars belong outside, in the cold, holding things up, not inside, at the table, taking up a seat. The problem for them, I thought, as I heard my grandfather's cane hit the floor again, is that pillars can be moved, and when they move, the whole roof comes down. I sat on the folding chair. The cold from the concrete floor was a physical presence, seeping through the soles of my boots. The garage was an assault on the senses, but not in a dramatic way. It was the mundane, layered smell of gasoline from the lawnmower, old fertilizer in a half-empty bag, and the metallic tang of the chest freezer next to me. The compressor kicked on with a heavy thrum, vibrating through the metal chair. This was where they stored the unwanted, the frozen, the surplus. It was exactly where Vivian wanted me. The door to the mudroom was cracked open, maybe an inch. It was just enough. It was the cruelest part. I was not just banished. I was forced to be an audience. I heard the bright, sharp clink of crystal glasses. That would be the toast. I heard the murmur of polite conversation, punctuated by a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. Vivian's laugh. It was her hosting laugh. High, light, and utterly fake. It was the sound she used when she was impressing people, the sound that usually preceded a large expense. I looked down at the folding table, the paper plate, the plastic fork, and, leaning against the roll of paper towels, a small cream-colored envelope. My name was written on it in Vivian's looping, immaculate script. I picked it up. It was expensive cardstock. I pulled out the card. It was blank, except for 5 words, written in the same perfect hand. Thanks for sponsoring, Vivian. Not Mom, not even stepmom, just Vivian. The signature of a corporate benefactor. The chair, the plate, the card. It was a curated humiliation. A clear, cold calculation designed to remind me of my place. I was not family. I was the budget. The door from the mudroom opened wider, startling me. The light from the house spilled in, momentarily blinding. Aunt Marla slipped through the opening, holding a small china plate, not a paper one. She closed the door quickly behind her, plunging us back into the dim garage light. Marla did not offer sympathy. Marla did not do sympathy. She was my mother's sister, and she was made of granite. She looked at the folding chair, at the paper towels, and just snorted. She really outdid herself this time, Marla said, her voice low. She thrust the plate at me. It had 3 small slices of turkey and a spoonful of cranberries. Eat this. I am not hungry, I said, my throat tight. I did not ask if you were hungry. I told you to eat. You do not go into battle on an empty stomach, Riley. I took the plate. The china was warm. He is here, I whispered. I heard. He is here, and he is not happy. Marla leaned against the chest freezer, crossing her arms. Vivian and Graham did not know he was coming. I was the one who called him, 3 days ago. I looked up at her, the fork halfway to my mouth. You called him? Of course I did, she said, as if it were obvious. I saw this coming. Vivian has been testing your boundaries for a year. The canceled birthday, the Netflix account. This garage stunt was the next logical step. I figured it was time for an adult to intervene. She looked toward the door. Something is happening tonight. Riley, something bigger than this garage. Calvin did not fly in from Arizona just because you were missing Thanksgiving. She was right. My grandfather did not make social calls. He made audits. As if summoned, we heard his voice again. This time, the cane hit the floor twice, a sharp, impatient sound. Tap, tap. Graham, Calvin's voice boomed. It was not the frail voice of an 82-year-old. It was the voice of a man who built a railroad. I asked you a question. Why is my granddaughter missing a seat? The silence from the dining room was thick. I could picture my father, Graham, swirling the wine in his glass, studying its legs as if they held the answer to the universe. He would be avoiding Calvin's gaze at all costs. Then, Sloane. Her voice was high, fluting, and dipped in casual disregard. Oh, Grandpa, she is fine. Riley likes the cool air. She said she was feeling overwhelmed and wanted some quiet. The lie was so bald, so lazy. It was almost impressive. I like the cool air. I wanted quiet. She likes the garage? Calvin's voice was dangerously quiet. Vivian jumped in, her voice a cascade of false sincerity. Father Hart, please, do not make this a thing. It was just a simple booking error. The caterer. They must have miscounted the chairs. We have far more people than we expected. Riley understands completely. She offered to wait outside until we could rearrange after the soup course. A booking error. I glanced through the crack in the door. From my angle, I could see the end of the long mahogany table. It was set for 20. I could clearly see, at the far end, 2 empty chairs. They were flanking the centerpiece, polished and waiting, their absence a testament to the lie. They had not run out of chairs. They had removed mine. The silence stretched. My father, Graham, said nothing. He was the head of this house, and he was letting his wife and daughter lie to the patriarch. His silence was his endorsement. He was complicit. He was a coward. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The vibration felt violent in the quiet garage. I pulled it out, annoyed, expecting another demand from Vivian. It was an email, a fraud alert from my bank. Not my usual bank. This was from a major credit card company I had not used in years. Subject: an update regarding your new account application. My fingers went cold. I tapped it open. Dear Riley Hart, it read. Thank you for opening your new Signature Elite credit account. Your application has been approved with a $15,000 limit. Your new card is being expedited and should arrive at the address on file within 2 business days. The address on file was not my Denver apartment. The address on file was here. Lakefield, my father's house. I felt the blood drain from my face, the spreadsheet, the diamond ring, the Netflix account. They were small thefts. This was identity fraud. This was a felony. This $12,000 party, the one Vivian was demanding I sponsor, they never intended for me to pay for it. They had already paid for it. Using my name, my credit, my future. The garage was not just a humiliation to get me to pay. It was a distraction to hide what they had already done. Marla was watching me. What is it? You look like you just saw a ghost. I just saw a crime, I whispered, turning the phone screen toward her. Her eyes scanned the email. The granite in her expression hardened into something sharper. That witch. That absolute witch. I looked at the phone. I looked at the door. I could hear Vivian trying to charm my grandfather, her voice shifting topics. Calvin, you must try this soup, the chef. I had the evidence in my hand. I could burst through that door right now. I could scream, thief. I could detonate the entire party, the entire family, right here, right now, in front of the turkey. But that is what they would expect, a hysterical outburst, an emotional daughter. Just like my mother, easy to dismiss. No, I was an analyst. I dealt in data, and data is most effective when presented in the right forum. I closed the phone. I took a deep, stabilizing breath of the cold, gasoline-tinged air. I would not confront them in the shadows of the garage. I would not give them the satisfaction of a fight in the mudroom. I would wait. I would wait until every single person was seated. I would wait until the lies had been told, until the arrogance was at its peak. I would wait for the moment of maximum illumination. I did not have to wait long. My grandfather had clearly had enough of the lies. He did not speak again. We just heard the heavy, resolute sound of his cane. Tap, tap, tap. But it was not stationary. It was moving. He was walking away from the dining room, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood. "Father Hart, where are you going?" Vivian's voice was suddenly tight with panic. Tap, tap. He was in the mudroom. "Calvin, wait. The soup is being served." My father's voice, finally, full of alarm. "I am not hungry, Graham." Calvin's voice cut through the door. "I am going to find my granddaughter." Marla stepped back from the door, a tiny, grim smile on her face. The doorknob turned. The door swung open, flooding the garage with the warm, golden light of the house. Calvin Hart stood in the doorway. He was exactly as I remembered him. Tall, imposing, wearing a perfectly tailored suit. He did not look frail. He looked furious. His eyes scanned the scene. He saw the cold concrete. He saw the chest freezer. He saw the metal folding table, the paper plate, and the insulting single-serve plastic fork. Then his eyes locked on mine. Behind him, the entire party had risen from their seats. Graham, Vivian, Sloane, and a dozen horrified guests were crowded in the mudroom and the kitchen entryway, peering into the darkness. Vivian's face was a mask of pale, horrified rage. My father looked physically ill. Sloane just looked confused, her phone still in her hand. The knot, so carefully tied by Vivian, was now pulled tight, and everyone was watching. Calvin Hart stared at the paper plate, then at his son. "You let this happen, Graham?" he asked, his voice shaking, not with age, but with a cold, controlled fury. The hearing had begun. I stood in the doorway, caught between the cold garage and the hot, bright humiliation of the kitchen. My grandfather, Calvin Hart, did not move. He planted his cane on the tiled floor of the mudroom, and the cluster of guests instinctively recoiled from him. He was 82, but he commanded the space, his physical presence amplified by a sheer, cold rage. He did not look at Vivian. He did not look at the guests. His eyes were fixed on his son, my father, who was visibly shrinking. "Graham," Calvin said, his voice a low gravel. "In 1978, the economy turned. I had 2 rail contracts default in 1 week, and the bank called my note. Your mother was sick. You were 10. My father winced. He hated being reminded of anything before his executive life. "I had a car," Calvin continued, his voice cutting through the quiet. "A 1977 Cadillac Eldorado, midnight blue. It was the first truly beautiful thing I had ever bought with my own hands. I loved that car more than was reasonable." Vivian looked impatient, confused by this pointless story. She shot a look at Graham, urging him to cut this off. He did not. "The bank was going to take our house, Graham, the house your mother planted roses around," Calvin said. "So I sold the car. I sold my Eldorado to a man I despised for half of what it was worth, just to get the cash, and I kept the roof over your head. I paid the note." He finally broke his gaze from my father and looked around the opulent kitchen, at the gleaming sub-zero refrigerators, at the marble countertops. "We ate canned stew on a card table for a month," he said, his voice thick with the memory. "But we ate it together, in that house, at that table." He turned, and his gaze was now a physical weight on Vivian. "The Hart family does not leave its people off the table. We do not banish our own to the garage to eat off paper plates, not for poverty, and certainly not for this performance of wealth." There was a heavy, accusatory silence. Vivian, however, was not a woman easily shamed by parables. She recovered instantly, placing a hand on her pearl necklace. She manufactured a small, brittle laugh. "Oh, Calvin, that is a lovely story. From a different time," she said, her voice dripping condescension. "But things are more complicated now. This is my house." Our house, Graham muttered, so quietly it was almost lost. And in my house, Vivian continued, lifting her chin, we have a new rule. It is very simple. Those who do not contribute sit on the sidelines. We cannot be expected to carry dead weight. Contribute. The word struck me like a physical blow. It echoed in the garage. Contribute. I thought of the spreadsheet in my apartment. I thought of the mortgage payment that had cleared my account just last week. I thought of the property taxes, the utilities, the Santorini trip, the diamond ring, the $12,000 catering bill for this very meal, which she was demanding I pay after having already opened a credit card in my name. Dead weight. A cold, sharp, clarifying anger cut through the humiliation. It was the best feeling I had had in years. She had not just insulted me, she had handed me the gavel. Calvin turned his head. Slowly. He looked back at me, past Marla. His eyes were sharp, the eyes of an analyst, a man who built things. He saw the shift in my expression. He saw the humiliation vanish, replaced by something hard. He did not ask, what did she mean? He asked something far more dangerous. He asked something no one in this family had bothered to ask me in 3 years. Riley, he said, his voice softening just a fraction. Are you all right? The direct question, the simple, human concern, was almost my undoing. I felt the burn of tears, but I refused them. I was not the victim in the garage. I was the auditor. I took a step forward, leaving the shadow of the garage and stepping fully into the light of the mudroom. I let every guest see my face. I am now, Grandpa, I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried in the absolute silence. Vivian's smile froze. I am all right, I repeated, locking eyes with her. Because 3 months ago, I stopped. The silence was electric. Stopped what? I saw the question on the faces of the guests, but not on Vivian's. Vivian's face went from pale porcelain to ashen gray. She knew. She knew exactly what I had stopped. I had stopped the money. I had stopped the transfers. I had stopped the contributions. Sloane, completely oblivious, looked up from her phone. Stopped what? God, you are being so dramatic. Riley, you are ruining Thanksgiving. She was standing next to a young man I did not recognize. He was handsome in a glossy, superficial way, wearing an expensive watch and a smirk. This must be Cam, the new boyfriend, the NFT investor, the man who traded in vapor. He whispered something in Sloane's ear, and she giggled. My father, Graham, finally snapped into action. His entire life was built on avoiding confrontation. All right, enough of this, he said, trying for a jovial, booming tone that cracked with panic. This is a holiday. We are all family. Dad, you are here. What a wonderful surprise. Riley, come in for heaven's sake. Let's open some wine. He bustled over to the massive, built-in wine fridge, his hands fumbling with the handle. He pulled out a bottle of deep red, a label I recognized instantly. Here we are, he announced, holding it aloft like a peace treaty. A 1998 Chateauneuf du Pape. A celebration is in order. He did not see what I saw. He did not see what Marla saw. Tied around the neck of the bottle, with a small faded velvet ribbon, was the original gift tag. I could read it from the doorway. Happy birthday. Dad, hope this is a good one. Love, Riley. I had bought him that bottle for his 62nd birthday, the party at the steakhouse, the one I was not invited to. He was trying to make peace with me using the very gift he had received while excluding me. The sheer, unconscious arrogance of it was breathtaking. Marla put a hand on my shoulder. It was not a gesture of comfort. It was a signal. It meant, now, time to talk. But Calvin moved first. He ignored the wine. He ignored Graham's desperate attempt at normalcy. He ignored Vivian, who was now motioning frantically to the caterers to just serve the soup, to create noise, to break the awful tension. Calvin Hart walked past the guests, who parted for him like water. He walked the full length of the magnificent 20-foot mahogany dining table, past the polished silver and the towering floral arrangements. He reached the head of the table, the host's chair, my father's seat. He did not sit down. He grabbed one of the empty, unused chairs. One of the chairs Vivian had claimed did not exist. It was heavy, carved oak, identical to the one at the head. He dragged it across the priceless Persian rug, the sound a low, tearing groan. He placed it directly at the head of the table. Then he turned, faced the room, and slapped his open palm on the high, carved back. The sound was like a gavel striking. "This chair," he announced to the silent room, "is for Riley." Vivian's composure finally shattered. This was not a disagreement. This was a coup. This was a public execution of her authority in her own house, in front of her guests. "You cannot be serious." "Calvin," she hissed, her voice losing its silk and finding its venom. "That is the head of the table. No one sits at the head of the table except the host. Graham is the host." My father looked at her, then at his father. He was a man trapped between his wife and his blood, and he had no spine for either. Calvin Hart smiled. It was a cold, thin smile. It was the smile of a man who had sold his Cadillac to a man he despised. It was the smile of a man about to foreclose. He looked at Vivian, but his words were for his son. "You are mistaken, Vivian," Calvin said, his voice level and lethal. "The host is not the person who sits in the chair. The host is the person who keeps the house, not the person who spends it." He pulled the heavy chair out, the legs scraping the floor. He looked directly at me. "Riley, sit." I walked past Marla. I walked past my father, who would not meet my eyes. I walked past my stepmother, whose face was a mask of pure hatred. I walked the full length of that table, and I sat down. I sat at the head of the table. The silence in the room was absolute. A thick, pressurized vacuum. The 20 guests, friends of my father and Vivian, stared. Some looked horrified, some fascinated. This was better than Thanksgiving theater. Vivian's face was a mottled, ugly red. Her eyes 2 slits of pure venom. My father, Graham, looked physically ill. He was still standing by the wine fridge, holding the bottle I had given him, a relic from a life he had tried to erase. "You," Vivian finally spat, her voice a low shake. "You think this is funny? You think you can waltz in here after I offered you a place?" "A place in the garage," Calvin cut in, his voice like ice. "She is ungrateful!" Vivian shrieked, pointing at me, her hand trembling. "After everything we have done for her, after all the support this family has given her, she dares to sit there? She hasn't contributed a thing." "Let's talk about contributions," I said. My voice was calm. It was my work voice, the one I used to debrief failed executives. I pulled my phone from my back pocket and placed it on the mahogany table, next to the silver butter knife. "I didn't bring my full analysis binder," I said, looking at her. "I wasn't planning on a full audit before dinner, but I am a risk analyst. I keep backups of everything." I unlocked the phone and opened a secure file. "I have a file here. It's a detailed log. We can call it 12 pages. For simplicity, it itemizes every transfer I have made to your primary checking account, Vivian, for the last 36 months, 3 full years." I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. The guests leaned in. "It's fascinating reading," I continued, swiping through the document. "You see, you were very good about labeling your requests. Medicine money was a popular one. I see a transfer for $800 for medication on April 10th. I swiped to another file, a photo, which is interesting, because I also have the Amex statement I paid for that month. It shows an $800 charge on that exact same day at the Serenity Springs Spa, a revitalization package. I looked up at her. "Your doctor's fees are also remarkable. They almost always match, to the dollar. The receipts from Sloane's favorite jewelry store." "That is a lie," Vivian snapped. "Is it?" I asked. "What about the roof? 3 months ago, you needed an emergency $20,000 transfer. Catastrophic roof damage. You said, you even sent me the invoice from the contractor." I pulled up the invoice PDF. Lakefield Exteriors, LLC, a company, I found with a simple state business search that is registered to your cousin, Dennis, a company whose business license is for interior design consultation, not roofing. I called the county. There have been no permits pulled for this address. Not for a roof, not for anything. Graham finally spoke, his voice strained. Riley, this is inappropriate. These are private family matters. This stopped being a private matter when you started committing felonies in my name, I said, my voice cutting him off. I switched from the file to my email, the one I had received in the garage. This is why you put me in the garage, isn't it, Vivian? It wasn't just to be cruel, it was to keep me busy, to punish me so I would send the $12,000 you demanded for this party. I turned the phone and held it up. But you didn't need my transfer. You had already secured the funds. I received this alert 30 minutes ago, an application for 2 new Signature Elite credit cards, approved, with a combined limit of $25,000, opened using my social security number, and the delivery address for the new cards. I looked around the table. This house, this address. The collective gasp from the guests was sharp. You got sloppy, I said, my voice dropping. My job is to find the cracks in a system, and your system is full of them, like the mail. I have a notice from the post office. Vivian, a package containing a replacement PIN was returned to the bank last week. The reason given by the mail carrier? Recipient does not reside at this address. Even the post office knows I don't live here. You've been playing this game for so long, you started to believe I was just an abstract line of credit. And the texts, I said, pulling up our message history. My favorites, the ones where you're having sudden heart palpitations and need me to wire money immediately or you might not make it. I found the one she sent last month, a picture of a hospital-grade heart monitor, the rhythm slow and alarming. This one was good, very dramatic. It almost worked. I tapped the screen, then tapped Search Image. The results flooded the screen. It's a stock photo, Vivian, from a medical supply website. You did not even bother to crop out the watermark. A glass shattered. Sloane had dropped her champagne flute. So what? She burst out, her face flushed with wine and rage. So what if Mom moved some money around? It's family money. You have plenty of it. It's just family debt. What is the big deal? Family debt. Enough, Graham roared. He slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. His face was white. He was staring at Sloane, but his terror was directed at me. That is enough, Riley, not one more word. The crystal wine glass in his other hand, the one filled with the wine I bought him, was shaking. The red wine sloshed, threatening to spill. Calvin Hart had been silent through all of this. He had watched me, listened to every word. Now, he turned his iron gaze back to his son. Graham, he asked, his voice deceptively soft. Did you use your daughter's name to take out loans? My father's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. He looked at Vivian, who was staring at her empty plate, her entire body rigid. He looked at Sloane, who was now crying. Answer me, boy, Calvin demanded. No one spoke. The entire room seemed to be holding its breath. Well, Aunt Marla said, setting her napkin down. Speaking of loans, she took her own phone out of her purse. I've been getting the most interesting calls, she said to the table. She pressed the speakerphone button and played her most recent voicemail. A crisp, professional voice filled the room. This is a message for a Mr. R. Hart. My name is Philip Cole, from the Commercial Lending Department at Interwest Bank. We are calling to verify your personal guarantee on the new business line of credit for Cam and Sloane, LLC. We just need a final verbal confirmation from the guarantor, Mr. Hart, before we can release the initial $50,000 tranche. Sloane stopped crying. She stared at her new boyfriend, Cam, the NFT investor. Cam, who had been smirking just 10 minutes ago, now looked like he was going to be sick. He was staring at Marla's phone as if it were a bomb. Cam and Sloane, LLC, Marla repeated. turning her phone off. And R, heart. I assume they did not mean me. Graham, Riley. I believe your middle name starts with an R, does it not? It does, I said. My grandfather looked at Cam, then at Sloane, then at my father. He looked like he was going to have a stroke. I picked up my phone from the table. The room was spinning. It's over, I said, standing up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. I wanted to wait. I wanted to do this privately. But you put me in the garage. You forced this. I looked at Vivian, then at my father. As of 40 minutes ago, I have placed a permanent freeze on all 3 of my credit bureaus. I have already filed an official identity theft report with the Federal Trade Commission, and I have a meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow morning with my lawyer, Tessa Rowan. She specializes in financial fraud. I let that sink in. You will be hearing from her. No one moved. No one spoke. The entire, extravagant, $12,000 meal was getting cold on the table. The only sound in the opulent room was the loud, heavy tick-tock, tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hallway, counting down. The grandfather clock in the hall was the only thing that dared to make a sound. The tick-tock was a hammer striking an anvil. My words, District Attorney, hung in the air, a physical, toxic cloud. The stunned silence of the guests was a prelude. Then, the predictable, desperate counteroffensive began. Vivian, naturally, was first. Her mask of rage shattered, to be replaced instantly by a performance of heartbreaking sorrow. It was a pivot so sudden it was almost magnificent. Her hand flew to her chest. Her eyes widened, and 2 perfect, crystalline tears welled and spilled down her cheeks. "How can you do this?" she whispered, her voice a fragile, broken thing. "Riley, how? After everything I have done, everything I have sacrificed, I was only trying to keep this family afloat." She turned, her appeal aimed not at me or Calvin, but at the horrified guests, her audience. "Do you think it's easy? Managing this? Maintaining the dignity of the Hart name after Graham? After the setbacks?" She took a ragged breath, the picture of a tragic matriarch. "I was trying to protect us. I was shielding him," she gestured to my father, "from the humiliation. I was keeping up appearances for all of us. And yes, maybe I moved money around. Maybe. But it was for the family. It was to preserve our good name. And this is my thanks?" She collapsed into her chair, her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with manufactured sobs. My father, Graham, his face a white mask of fury, took his cue. His desperation did not manifest as tears. It came out as venom. "You," he snarled, and he took a step toward me. He was no longer the jovial, cowardly host. He was a cornered animal. "You are a traitor. You are not a Hart. My own daughter. A traitor." He pointed a shaking finger, not at me, but at Marla, who was watching with a look of clinical detachment. "You did this," he yelled at her. "You and your side of the family. You have been poisoning her against me since her mother died, twisting her, manipulating my daughter to turn against her own father." "She did not need my help, Graham," Marla said, her voice bored. "She has a brain. She learned to use it. You are just upset because she used it on you. You, ungrateful." Sloane had found her voice, and it was a shriek. She was not crying. She was incandescent with a very modern, very specific type of rage. The rage of an influencer whose narrative has been stolen. "You are ruining everything!" she screamed at me. Her phone was in her hand, but she was not calling for help. She was opening her camera. "I am so done with you. You come in here, act like a victim, and try to destroy our family. You are 1,000% ungrateful. I am going to tell everyone what you are really like." She turned her phone on, not to me, but to the table. She began filming the glittering crystal, the steaming turkey, the opulent flowers. She was creating content. "Everyone, look," she said into her phone, her voice thick with fake tears, recording a video for her story. Just a perfect Thanksgiving, and my sister is here trying to tear us all down, all because she is a bitter, jealous. Put the phone down. Sloane? Calvin's voice was not loud, but it cut through her hysteria like a razor. She froze. Phone still raised. This is not a social media opportunity, he said. This is a crime scene. That is not true, the NFT boyfriend, Cam, suddenly piped up. He puffed out his chest, stepping forward to stand beside Sloane, placing a protective hand on her arm. He was trying to be the hero. This is just a misunderstanding. And you, he said, pointing at me, you are in serious trouble for making false accusations. He smirked, trying to look intimidating. My guy, my lawyer, he is the most cutthroat attorney in the city. He is a senior member of the American Legal Association. I just stared at him. The American Legal Association? I asked. Yeah, that is right, he said, nodding, feeling confident. You mean the American Bar Association? I said flatly. The American Legal Association does not exist. It's not a thing. Cam's smirk evaporated. He looked confused. No, I am pretty sure. You are not pretty sure, I said. You are an idiot. And you are an accessory. That LLC application for $50,000, with my forged signature as guarantor, that is bank fraud. You should stop talking. Cam's face went white. He visibly deflated. She is lying. Vivian's head snapped up. Her tears were gone, replaced by a desperate, last-ditch defense. She is lying about everything. The money, the spas. It was for my health. I am sick. I am a very sick woman. She scrambled from her chair and ran to the large mahogany sideboard. She fumbled with a drawer, pulling out a sheaf of papers in a pristine, clear plastic sleeve. She threw it onto the table in front of Calvin. There, read it, she commanded. My medical records, my charts, from the hospital. It is all in there. The palpitations, the stress. Look at it. Calvin picked up the packet. I did not move. Vivian, I said, my voice tired. I already told you, I am an analyst. Read it, she screamed at Calvin. You do not have to, I said. Just look at the bottom left corner of every single page. Calvin angled the papers toward the light of the chandelier. He squinted. Then he looked at Vivian. It says, patient demo, Calvin said, his voice dead. Medical record template. He dropped the packet on the table as if it were contaminated. Vivian stared at the papers, her mouth open. She had been so accustomed to her lies being believed. She had not even bothered to find a high-quality forgery. Graham, she whispered, turning to my father. This was the breaking point. The lies had failed. The theater had failed. The bravado had failed. My father looked at the fake medical records. He looked at Cam, who was now texting frantically. He looked at Sloane, who was staring at her useless boyfriend. He looked at me, and he cracked. Stop, he bellowed, slamming both fists on the table. The dishes and silver jumped. Stop it, all of you. Just stop. He walked around the table until he was standing directly in front of me. His face was a wreck of fear and anger. Okay, Riley, you win, he said, his voice a low, desperate hiss. The guests strained to hear. You have made your point. You have humiliated us. Is that what you wanted? Are you happy now? This is not about being happy, Dad. Then stop, he pleaded. This lawyer, this fraud report, it is insane. It is a mistake. Just cancel it. Cancel the report. We will fix this. I will pay it back. I will pay you every cent. I promise. I will get a job. We will sell. We will sell the car. Just, please, do not do this to me. Not to your father. He was begging. He was begging to be allowed to get away with it. I looked at his face. The man who had let me sit in the garage. The man who had called me a pillar while he hollowed me out. No, I said. His face contorted. What did you say? I said no. I am not canceling the report. The report is the only way this gets undone. It is the only legal document that proves I did not open those cards. It is the only thing that will remove this from my credit history. The report is non-negotiable. It stays. That is the condition. You... He raised his hand, his body tensing, and for a second, I thought he might actually hit me. Do not... Calvin's voice was a whip crack. My father froze. Do not raise your hand to her, Graham, Calvin said, standing up from his chair. This family does not threaten a woman for standing up straight. You have done enough. My father deflated, the rage vanishing, leaving only a hollow, pathetic shell. Marla, who had been watching this all unfold, tapped her water glass with a fingernail. Ting. Calvin, she said, into the sudden quiet. This is a thought. Does this situation affect the terms of the Clementine Trust? The name hung in the air. The Clementine Trust. My great-grandmother's trust. I barely knew what it was. But my father did, and Vivian did. Vivian's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a new, fresh terror. What? That has nothing to do with this. I do not know, Marla, Calvin said, steepling his fingers. I would have to look at the moral turpitude clause. It is an interesting question. It is not, Vivian shrieked. Ding dong. The doorbell. Everyone froze. It was a sound from another world, a normal sound. A caterer, pale and shaking, looked at Vivian. Ma'am? Do not answer it, Vivian hissed. Ding dong. Just ignore it, Graham mumbled. The side door, the one from the mudroom, the one to the garage, suddenly swung open. A woman in a bright orange parka stood there, holding a foil-covered pie pan. It was Mrs. Jensen, their next-door neighbor. Hello? She called out, cheerful and loud. I just saw all the cars. I did not know you were having such a big... Oh! She stepped into the kitchen, right into the tableau of frozen horror. She saw the guests, standing, not eating. She saw Vivian's tear-streaked, furious face. She saw Graham, white as a sheet. She saw Calvin, looking like a thundercloud. And she saw me, standing at the head of the table. Goodness, Mrs. Jensen said, her smile faltering. Did I come at a bad time? No one spoke. One of the guests, a woman near the back, whispered too loudly to her husband. She said, identity theft. Mrs. Jensen heard it. Her eyes went wide. This was Vivian's worst nightmare. Not jail, not poverty, social ruin, the neighbors finding out. Get out! Vivian screamed, not at Mrs. Jensen, but at the guest who had whispered, All of you, get out! She ran to the massive dining room windows, grabbing the heavy velvet drapes and yanking them shut, as if she could hide the scene from the outside world. Graham, close the curtains, she yelled. Get her out of here. Get that woman out of my house. Mrs. Jensen, holding her pumpkin pie, just stared, paralyzed. This was my exit. While the room dissolved into chaos, with guests grabbing their coats and Vivian trying to push Mrs. Jensen back into the mudroom, I picked up my phone. I slid it into my coat pocket. I looked at my father, who was just standing there, paralyzed, his life burning down around him. I looked at Vivian, who was frantically drawing drapes. I looked at Sloane, who was now in a screaming match with Cam. Then I walked, calmly, down the length of the table. Marla and Calvin fell into step beside me. We reached the front door. I paused and turned back. My lawyer's office, I called out over the noise. 9 a.m., Tessa Rowan. Her office is on 17th. She is expecting you. I looked directly at my father, at Vivian, at Sloane, and at Cam. Be there. Anyone who is not there, I will assume is not interested in a pretrial settlement, and I will take my full, unredacted file, including the LLC application and the wire fraud, directly to the district attorney's office. I opened the front door. The November air was cold and clean. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, I said. We stepped out. I closed the door behind us, leaving them in the dark, curtain-drawn room, with the smell of a cooling turkey and the baffled neighbor still holding her pie. The drive back to Denver was a blur of highway lights and adrenaline. Marla and Calvin had taken a black car to Calvin's downtown hotel, a fortress of quiet, old-money luxury. I had driven myself, needing the sterile isolation of my car. I did not turn on the music. I just listened to the hum of the engine and the sound of my own breathing. I got back to my apartment just after 10 p.m. It was small, clean, and entirely mine. Every item in it was something I had bought, paid for, and chosen. It was the only place I felt truly safe. But this was not a night for rest. This was a night for war. I went to my office closet and pulled out the large whiteboard I used for complex risk modeling. I wheeled it into my living room. For the next 2 hours, I did not think like a daughter. I thought like an analyst. I took the 36-month spreadsheet and transcribed it. Not all of it, just the critical path. I used a red marker for Vivian's medical requests and linked them to the corresponding spa or jewelry receipts in green. I used a blue marker for Sloane's tuition or startup money and linked it to the Santorini trip and the diamond ring. I used a black marker for the new, fraudulent credit cards and the LLC application. The board became a timeline, a map of my exploitation. It was a clear, cold, undeniable story of escalating fraud. Seeing it laid out, not as a messy series of personal betrayals, but as a clean data set, was clarifying. It removed the last of my emotional hesitation. This was not a family dispute. This was a long-term financial crime. At midnight, I made my first call. I did not call a family friend. I did not call a mediator. I called the name Marla had given me weeks ago, a name I had kept saved in my phone under contingency. "You have reached the offices of Tessa Rowan." A crisp, recorded voice said, "Our hours are 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. If this is an emergency." I pressed 1. A moment later, a sleepy, annoyed voice answered, "This is the emergency line. Who is this?" "I have an urgent financial fraud and identity theft case. It is domestic. I was referred by Marla Jensen." The sleepiness vanished from the voice. "One moment." A few seconds later, a new voice came on the line, sharp, awake, and utterly devoid of warmth. "This is Tessa Rowan. Talk to me." Tessa Rowan's reputation in Denver legal circles was terrifying. They called her scorched earth. She did not handle polite divorces. She handled high-dollar, high-conflict family asset disputes. She was the person you called when you wanted to win, not when you wanted to find a solution. I talked. For 20 minutes, I laid out the case. I used the data from the whiteboard, the 3 years of transfers, the fraudulent cards, the LLC application with the forged guarantee, the faked medical invoices, the garage. Tessa was silent the entire time. She did not interrupt. She just listened. When I was finished, the line was quiet for a beat. "Miss Hart," Tessa said. Her voice was impressed. "You have done 90% of my job for me. Most clients come to me with tears and a vague sense of injustice. You have brought me a prepared indictment." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you email me every single document you just mentioned, the bank statements, the texts, the photo of the stock image, the LLC application Marla found, everything. I want it by 6 a.m. I will review it, and I will be at my office at 8 a.m. Your family is expected at 9. I will see you at 8:30. "They will not have a lawyer," I said. "Not a real one." "Good," Tessa said, and hung up. I spent the next 4 hours scanning, organizing, and emailing files. At 5 a.m., I called my direct supervisor at Atlas Ridge Advisory on his personal line. "Riley," he said, his voice thick with sleep and alarm. "What is wrong?" "I have a severe personal and legal emergency." "Mark," I said, "it involves identity theft and significant financial fraud originating from within my family. I have a 9 a.m. meeting with legal counsel to begin proceedings." Mark, to his credit, was a good boss. He knew my work ethic. He knew I would not make this call unless it was critical. "Take the week," he said. No hesitation. "Take 2, whatever you need. Use your wellness leave. It is exactly what it is for. And Riley, lock down your accounts. All of them. Already done, Mark, I said. Good girl, he replied. Let me know if you need a character reference from the company. We will back you. Thank you, I said, and hung up. I felt a small, strange pang of loyalty. My company, a faceless corporation, was treating me more like family than my own blood. Next, the bureaus. I had already frozen my credit, but I had not yet filed the full detailed reports. I logged onto the websites for all three: Experian, Equifax, TransUnion. I uploaded the official FTC identity theft report I had filed from the garage. I disputed the new credit card accounts. I formally requested a 7-year fraud alert be placed on my file. This would make it nearly impossible for anyone, including me, to open new credit without a complex verification process. It was a suit of armor. At 7 a.m., my phone rang. It was Tessa Rowan. I have your files, she said. They are beautiful. I need one more thing. The IP address. The one used to submit the online applications for the cards. I do not have that, I said. Your provider does. Call them. Tell them you have an active FTC fraud report and you need the IP logs for the application dates. They will argue, be rude, get a supervisor, get me those logs. It took 45 minutes. It took 2 supervisors, but I got them. I emailed the log file to Tessa. At 7:50 a.m., my phone rang again. It was Marla. I am at Calvin's hotel. He is an early riser, she said. He is on a call with his bank, not his branch manager, the head of compliance for the entire Western region. Apparently, the man used to be his caddy. Calvin is impressive. He is arranging an external audit of Graham's finances going back a decade. Good, I said, rubbing my raw eyes. Also, she continued, I went home and went through your mother's old things. I found a box, old letters, bank statements from her marriage to Graham. I found 3 envelopes where he clearly signed her name on financial authorization forms. The signature is a near-perfect match for the one on that LLC document. He has been practicing for a long time. Bring them, I said. We are on our way, she said. And Riley, wear your best suit. I looked at the whiteboard, a monument to 3 years of theft. I looked at the coffee cup in my hand. I was exhausted, but I was not tired. I was operating on something purer than caffeine. I was running on cold, clean, disciplined purpose. I showered and put on my best suit, a dark navy, sharply tailored. It was my armor. Before I left, I went to my desk drawer and pulled out a small, silver-backed frame. It was a picture of my mother, taken years before she met my father. She was young, on a beach, smiling. She had been a kind, soft woman, a woman who had been steamrolled by my father's passive greed and his new wife's active malice. They had counted on me being her daughter, soft, forgiving, easy to guilt. They had forgotten I was also Calvin Hart's granddaughter. I placed the photo on my desk, facing the door. It was not a plea for vengeance. It was a reminder of what I was protecting. I was not just saving my future. I was honoring her past by refusing to be the victim she had been. I backed up my entire evidence file onto 3 separate encrypted hard drives, one for me, one for Tessa, and one I would give to Calvin, to be stored in his hotel safe. I practiced what I would say. Tessa had warned me. They will cry. They will bargain. They will gaslight you. Do not engage. Do not get pulled into an argument about love or family or forgiveness. This is not a therapy session. This is a negotiation of terms. Stick to the data. I practiced in the mirror. This is not a debate, I said to my reflection. This is a statement of facts. The facts are not emotional. They are just true. I checked my bag. Hard drives, charging cables, a fresh legal pad. My phone pinged. A new email from Tessa. Subject, Settlement Draft V1. I opened it. It was brutal. It was magnificent. She had not just asked for the fraudulent debt to be erased. She had drafted a full repayment plan. 1. Full reimbursement of all documented funds. totaling over $300,000, to be paid to me within 90 days. 2. The funds for this repayment would be sourced from the immediate, forced liquidation of non-essential assets. This included Vivian's Porsche, Sloane's convertible, Sloane's diamond ring, and the entirety of Graham's wine collection. 3. The Lakefield house was to be listed for sale, immediately, with the proceeds held in escrow to satisfy the remaining debt. 4. A public, written apology, to be distributed to the guests of the Thanksgiving dinner, retracting all statements made about my lack of contribution. And then, the masterstroke, a clause I had not even thought to ask for. 5. A legally binding no-contact agreement. Graham, Vivian, and Sloane were forbidden from contacting me, directly or indirectly, for a period of 24 months, no calls, no texts, no emails, no showing up at my apartment or my office. The penalty for each individual violation, $50,000. I saved the document. I put my phone in my pocket. I looked at the picture of my mother one last time. It was time to go to work. Tessa Rowan's primary conference room was designed to inflict psychological damage. It was a long, narrow box of frosted glass and brushed steel, dominated by a 20-foot black granite table polished to a mirror finish. There were no paintings on the wall, no welcoming plants. There was just the table, 12 severe black leather chairs, a single speakerphone, and a large, dark television screen on one wall. At the head of the table, a small, brushed steel digital clock measured the time in silent, red numbers, 9:03 a.m. Tessa sat at the head, in the chair facing the door. She was reviewing a document, her pen making small, sharp check marks. I sat to her right. Calvin and Marla sat opposite me. We were the prosecution. We had arrived at 8:30, and we had spent the time in silence, drinking black coffee from the firm's imposing machine. At 9:07, the glass door swung open. A flustered paralegal showed them in. Vivian entered first. She was attempting a look of outraged dignity, wearing a severe black suit, as if attending a funeral. Her face was pale and puffy from a night of, I assumed, genuine tears. Graham followed. He looked like he had aged 10 years. His skin was gray, his eyes bloodshot, and he walked with the unsteady shuffle of a man who had not slept. Sloane and Cam came last. They looked like college students who had been called to the dean's office. Sloane's eyes were hidden behind massive designer sunglasses, and Cam just stared at his shoes. They were accompanied by a fifth man. He was in his 50s, with a tan and a loud striped shirt under a golf blazer. He was carrying a soft-sided leather briefcase. This had to be Cam's cutthroat lawyer. Mr. Hart, Mrs. Hart, Tessa said, not standing up. She gestured to the chairs at the far end of the table. Please. They sat, a miserable huddle. The man in the blazer sat beside Graham, pulling out a yellow legal pad and a gold pen with a flourish. I am Philip Peterson, the man announced, his voice a little too loud for the room. I am representing the interests of the Hart family in this discussion. Tessa finally looked up from her paper. She gave him a flat, cold smile. Mr. Peterson, you are a real estate attorney. Your office is in a strip mall in Highlands Ranch. You primarily handle zoning disputes and residential closings. You are not representing anyone here today. Peterson's tan seemed to pale. Now, see here. I am a member of the... You are a member of the bar. Tessa cut him off. That makes you an officer of the court, which means you are ethically bound to inform your clients that you are dangerously out of your depth. This is a negotiation to prevent a multi-count felony fraud indictment. You are welcome to stay and take notes, but if you offer legal advice, I will file a complaint for malpractice before lunch. Do you understand me? Peterson's mouth opened and closed. He looked at Graham. Graham looked at his hands. Peterson slowly put the cap back on his gold pen. Good, Tessa said. She folded her hands. Let's begin. My father took a shaky breath. He was trying to find the old authority, the executive voice he used to have. I want to be very clear, he said, his voice cracking. We are here against our will. We are not admitting to anything. We are not agreeing to anything. And we are certainly not signing anything. This is harassment." Tessa smiled. It was the smile I had seen on the whiteboard timeline, the smile of an analyst who has found the flaw. "Thank you for clarifying your position, Mr. Hart," she said. She reached for a stack of documents in front of her. "In that case, we can accelerate the proceedings." She slid 4 thick, bound documents down the polished table. They stopped perfectly. One in front of Graham, one in front of Vivian, one in front of Sloane, and one in front of Cam. "This is a courtesy," Tessa said. "I drafted it this morning. It is a preliminary draft of the criminal complaint I will be filing with the Denver District Attorney's Office. It outlines the charges: multiple counts of identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit bank fraud, and mail fraud." Graham stared at the cover sheet. He did not open it. "I do not think you want that, Mr. Hart," Tessa said softly. "The moment that file is time-stamped, your assets are frozen. Pending investigation, your names become public record. The Lakefield address becomes public record. I imagine Mrs. Jensen, your neighbor, is a very avid reader of the local news." Vivian flinched, as if she had been struck. "This," Tessa continued, "is a negotiation. You have done something criminal. My client, in an act of extraordinary generosity she does not owe you, is willing to handle this as a civil matter. In exchange for her silence and her agreement not to pursue criminal charges, you are going to make her whole." "We will not be blackmailed," Graham said, his voice rising with panic. "This is not blackmail, Mr. Hart. This is restitution," Tessa said. "But since you are unclear on the facts, let's review them. I believe the core of your defense is that this was a family misunderstanding." She nodded to her paralegal, who tapped a key on a laptop. The large screen on the wall lit up. It was an email. From Vivian, hart@gmail.com. Cameron, price@gmail.com. Sent. November 5th, 4:18 p.m. Subject: the LLC setup. Cam, stop bothering me about the guarantor. Just use Riley's SSN. It is fine. She will not even notice. She pays for everything else. Just get it done and delete this chat. Cam made a small, strangled sound. Sloane ripped off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red and wild. That is not real. We were joking. That was a joke." Tessa looked at Sloane. "A joke. I see." She nodded to the paralegal again. The screen changed. It was a server log from Interwest Bank. "This joke," Tessa said, pointing with a laser, "was sent at 4:18 p.m. The application for the Cam and Sloane LLC $50,000 line of credit, using my client's forged Social Security number as personal guarantor, was received by the bank's server at 4:21 p.m. 3 minutes later." She looked at Sloane. "Your humor is incredibly efficient." Sloane burst into tears, a loud, ugly, gasping sob. "Cam, you were supposed to delete it, you idiot!" Cam, his face the color of wet cement, just stared at the screen. It was in my drafts. I thought You are accessories," Tessa said, her voice flat. "Both of you, and you." She looked at Vivian. "Are the primary conspirator—" "Graham," Vivian whispered, her hand trembling as she reached for his. "Graham, say something." My father was mute. He was staring at the screen, at the physical proof of his wife's intent, the evidence that this was not a mistake, but a calculated theft. "Now," Calvin Hart spoke for the first time. His voice filled the room, a heavy, cold weight. He had not brought a document. He had brought a briefcase. He placed it on the table and clicked the latches. It was full of old, leather-bound ledgers. "Graham," Calvin said. He opened the top ledger. The pages were yellowed, filled with neat, cursive script. "I am a man who keeps records, like Riley." He turned the book around. 1985. You defaulted on a condominium in Vale. I paid the note. $42,000. He closed that book and opened another. 1997. Your first startup, a company importing Italian marble. It went bankrupt in 6 months. I paid the creditors, $112,000. He looked at my father. 2008. Your portfolio collapsed. You were leveraged to the hilt. I kept the bank from taking your first house. I did not. I cannot even say the number, but I paid it. Calvin closed the ledger. His eyes were not angry. They were dead. I have spent my entire life, he said, bailing you out. I have spent my life cleaning up your messes. Graham, I did it because you are my son, because you are a heart. I told myself you were just weak, not malicious. He gestured to the screen, to Vivian, to the draft indictment. But this is not weakness. This is rot. You did not just steal from your daughter. You let your wife and your stepdaughter infect your entire life with their sickness. You let them do it under my name. He looked at Graham. As of this morning, you are removed as a beneficiary from my estate. The Clementine Trust, Vivian, will be restructured. You will not see another cent of my money. Not for your house, not for your cars, not for your lawyers. The Bank of Calvin Hart is closed, permanently. Vivian let out a low moan. This was the blow. This was the one that mattered. Now, Tessa said, stepping back in. The settlement. She slid a new document, the one I had read that morning, to the center of the table. The terms are not negotiable, she said. First, the criminal acts. You will all sign a legally binding confession of the facts. Admissible in court should you ever default. This confession will be held in escrow by my firm. Second, restitution. You will liquidate Vivian's Porsche, Sloane's convertible, the ring, she said, looking at Sloane's bare hand. I see you already started. Good. Graham's wine collection. An appraiser will be there this afternoon. Third, the house, the Lakefield property will be listed for sale within 10 days. 10, the proceeds will be put into a trust, managed by me, from which my client will be repaid in full. Fourth, the no-contact agreement. For 24 months, any attempt to contact Riley, her aunt, or her grandfather will result in an immediate $50,000 penalty and the release of the confession to the district attorney. You will sign this, Tessa said, or I will walk this complaint over to the courthouse myself. You have 1 hour. Vivian did the only thing she had left to do. She began to cry. Not the calculated, performative tears of last night. These were real, snotty, ugly, desperate sobs of a woman who had just lost everything. Please, she wept, looking at me. Riley, please, we can fix this. He is your father. Tessa slid the tissue box down the long table. It stopped in front of Vivian. Cry all you want, Mrs. Hart, Tessa said, her voice devoid of any emotion. Tears do not scrub digital fingerprints. My father ignored Tessa. He ignored his weeping wife. He had only one card left to play. He looked past me, past Marla, to the man at the end of the table, the man who had held the ledgers, his last, final safety net. Dad? Graham's voice was a child's voice, small, terrified. Dad, please, do not let them do this. Calvin Hart looked at his son. He looked at the 62-year-old man, broken and begging. He held his gaze for a long, silent moment. Then, slowly, my grandfather turned his chair. He turned his back on my father, and he looked out the window at the Denver skyline, his face like carved stone. He did not have to say no. The silence was the answer. I watched my father's face collapse. I watched the last bit of hope drain from him, leaving nothing but a hollow, gray shell. He had been cut off. For the first time in his life, there was no one left to pay the note. The signing of the settlement document, which took place in Tessa Rowan's sterile glass conference room, was not a moment of catharsis. It was an execution of terms. It was the quiet, brutal sound of 4 pens scratching on 30-pound bond paper. My father's hand shook so badly he smudged his signature. Vivian's face was a mask of gray. puffy defeat. Sloane was completely blank, her eyes vacant. Cam looked like he was going to be physically ill. When it was done, Tessa simply stacked the papers. "My paralegal," she said, "will validate your parking." She did not show them out. The war was over. The fallout was just beginning. News in a community like Lakefield, a place built on the shaky foundations of appearance and mutual surveillance, does not travel. It seeps. It moves like a low-pressure system, felt before it is seen. We signed the agreement on the Friday after Thanksgiving. The agreement stipulated that the house was to be listed within 10 days. Tessa, true to her scorched earth reputation, had a luxury realtor's sign hammered into the immaculate front lawn in less than 2. It was a massive, glossy placard, announcing the sale to the entire neighborhood. The tremors began on the community's private Facebook group, a digital kingdom over which Vivian had reigned for a decade. "Is that a for sale sign at the Hearts? In the middle of the holidays? That's so strange. Did something happen?" I saw Vivian at the market. She looked awful. This was the digital equivalent of Mrs. Jensen standing in the doorway, multiplied by 1,000. The social consequences were not loud. They were a series of profound, echoing silences. My father, Graham, in a desperate, pathological need for normalcy, went to his golf club. His entire identity was wrapped up in that clubhouse. He found his usual foursome on the putting green. "Graham!" one of them called out. A man named Bill, who ran a logistics company and had been at the Thanksgiving dinner. He was one of the guests who had fled. "Saw the sign on the lawn. Finally pulling the trigger on that Florida condo, eh? You sly dog." I was told later, by Marla, who heard it from Bill's wife, that my father just stood there. He did not say yes. He could not say no. He was a man without a narrative. The story of his success, the one Vivian had curated and I had funded, had evaporated, leaving only the truth. He just stared at Bill, missed a simple 3-foot putt, and walked back to his car. He did not play the first hole. Sloane, naturally, tried to control her own narrative. It was the only way she knew how to exist. She posted a new Instagram story 2 days after the signing. It was a black and white photo of her, holding a coffee cup, looking pensively out a window. The massive diamond was, of course, gone. The caption, "Starting a new cycle, shedding old energy that no longer serves me, focusing on what's real, hatch growth, hat new beginnings." She was attempting to rebrand the entire financial and criminal implosion as an act of enlightened wellness, a conscious uncoupling from a life that was, in fact, being forcibly repossessed. The internet, however, is not a kind audience. The first comment, before she could delete it, "Wait, where's the big ring?" The second, "What happened to Cam?" The third, from the daughter of one of the Thanksgiving guests, "Is shedding old energy code for your family is being forced to sell the house because your sister caught you all committing identity theft." Sloane's Instagram account went private 30 minutes later. And then, there was Vivian. The no-contact order was a binding, $50,000 per violation wall. She must have been suffocating behind it. On Wednesday, a week after the disastrous Thanksgiving, my phone vibrated. A text from a number I did not recognize. "You won. You took his house. You destroyed my life. I hope you are happy now." I stared at the message. It was the last, pathetic hiss of a failed gaslighter. It was a desperate, final attempt to pull me back into the emotional mud, to make me the villain of her story. She needed me to be the ungrateful, vengeful daughter, because the alternative was admitting that she was a common thief. I took a screenshot. I forwarded it to Tessa Rowan. My message was one word: invoice. Tessa replied 5 minutes later. Done. The first penalty payment is now due. I blocked the number. I did not feel rage, or pity, or even satisfaction. I felt an administrative click, the closing of a file. My wellness leave from Atlas Ridge was quiet. My apartment felt larger, the air cleaner. That night, Marla called me. "I'm making stew," she said, her voice brusque. "The cheap kind. From a box. Get over here. I drove to her small rental bungalow. The house smelled like onions and old books. We sat at her small, scarred wooden kitchen table. The bowls were cheap, mismatched porcelain. The spoons were thin. She ladled out the stew. It was perfectly adequate. We ate in silence for a few minutes. Well, Marla said, pointing her spoon at me, it's not a $12,000 catered turkey. It's good, Marla, I said. It's adequate, she repeated. But you'll notice you are not in the garage. I smiled. It was the first real, unforced smile in... I could not remember how long. There was no performance here, no crystal, no linen, no pretense, just a table, a chair, and a bowl of stew. It was the best meal I had ever had. The next day, my boss, Mark, called. Riley, he said, his voice professional but warm. I hope you are handling things. I am, Mark, thank you. Good. When you are ready to come back, I have a new project. It is a big one. We are developing a new advisory product for our high-net-worth family clients. It is about preventing internal financial malfeasance. He paused. It is a compliance shield, about setting up controls, about stopping exactly what, well, about stopping internal fraud before it starts. I understood immediately. You want me to use my experience. I want you to lead it, he said. Take your real-world data and build a methodology. Turn this mess into a system that protects other people. Yes, I said, the words coming out before I had even thought them. Yes, I can do that. I would like that very much. It was a life raft, not just a job, but a purpose, a way to alchemize the poison into an antidote. The final piece fell into place that Friday. A text from Calvin. Meet me. 4 p.m. The Brown Palace, T. The Brown Palace was old Denver, a fortress of quiet, Gilded Age luxury. It was his territory. I met him in the high, atrium lobby. A piano was playing softly. He was sitting in a plush, velvet armchair, a pot of tea and 2 fine china cups on the table. He looked lighter. The storm of rage from Thanksgiving had passed, leaving a quiet, settled resolve. Riley, he said, gesturing for me to sit. He poured the tea. We sat in silence for a moment, the sound of the piano echoing in the vast space. Your father, he said, not looking at me, staring at the tea, was a mistake I kept making. I thought that by cushioning his falls, I was being a good father. I was not. I was being an enabler. He looked at me, his eyes clear and sharp. I was funding his weakness, and I allowed that weakness to hurt you, and to hurt your mother before you. I am fixing my mistake. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit and pulled out a thin, simple envelope. It was not a check. It was a single, folded document. This is not money, girl, he said. This is structure. This is the revised charter for the Clementine Trust, the trust your great-grandmother set up, the one your father and Vivian were counting on as their final safety net. I took the paper, I unfolded it. It was a single addendum, the legal language dense, but one clause, at the bottom, was highlighted in yellow. Article 5, Section 3, the Family Table Clause. I read it. It is the foundational principle of this family that we provide for our own. Any beneficiary who, by act of malice or willful exclusion, removes another family member from a place of fellowship, specifically, but not limited to, the family table, shall be considered to have abdicated their place in this family. Their share and all future disbursements shall be considered forfeit, and they will be permanently excluded from the trust. I read it twice. Removes another family member from the family table. It is ironclad, Calvin said. My lawyers were very creative. I looked at him, the sheer, beautiful, brutal simplicity of it settling on me. He had taken the very weapon of my humiliation, the garage, the denial of a seat, and forged it into the legal mechanism of their disinheritance. You are punishing them, I said, my voice quiet. For me? Calvin picked up his teacup. "No, Riley," he said, taking a sip. "I am not punishing them. I am defining what this family is, and they," he said, "are no longer in it." That evening, as I was drafting the first wireframes for the Compliance Shield project, my phone buzzed. It was Tessa Rowan. "The Lakefield listing," she said. Her voice was crisp. "What about it?" I asked. "We have an offer." "Already?" I said, shocked. "It has only been on the market for a few days." "It has been on the market," Tessa corrected, "for less than 24 hours. We had 18 viewings today. The offer is all cash, and it is 20% over the asking price." I was stunned. "Who? Why?" "A developer," she said. "He wants the land. He has been trying to buy that corner lot for years, but Vivian always refused. Said it was legacy property. He is not interested in the house. He is interested in the location." "So they accepted?" "They had no choice," Tessa said. "But that is not the best part. The buyer has one condition. He is on a very tight schedule for his new project." I waited. "He demands possession of the property before Christmas. He wants the keys in 2 weeks." I closed my eyes. The last escape route. The last place for them to hide. To wait out the winter. To regroup. It was gone. "So," I said, the word heavy, "it is really over." "Riley," Tessa said, and I heard the smallest, faintest trace of something human in her voice. "They are being evicted from the house they stole from you in the middle of the holidays. It is over." I hung up the phone. I looked out my apartment window at the Denver skyline. The lights were sharp and cold. I was not happy. I was not sad. I was just free. The house was in chaos. Mrs. Jensen was standing in the mudroom. Her pie held out like a shield. My father was paralyzed. Vivian was frantically pulling drapes, trying to hide their shame from the streetlights. Sloane and Cam were in a low, vicious argument by the wine fridge. Into this pathetic, burning theater, Calvin Hart stepped forward. "Mrs. Jensen," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble that cut through the noise. "Your timing is unfortunate. We are in the middle of a private family audit. We must decline your kind offer." He gently took the pie from her hands and placed it on a counter, then guided her, still baffled, back to the mudroom door. "Good night." He closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking into place was final. The room was silent, save for Vivian's ragged breathing. "Sit," Calvin said. No one moved. "I said," he repeated, turning to face his son. "Sit down, all of you. Graham, Vivian, Sloane, you, too," he said, jabbing a finger at Cam. "You wanted to be part of this family's finances. You can be part of its dissolution." It was not a request. It was the command of a man who had built an empire. Slowly, like prisoners, they moved to the magnificent dining table. They sat in their assigned seats, among the cooling, untouched plates of food, the $12,000 meal. Calvin walked to the head of the table, where my father, Graham, was about to sit. "Not there," Calvin said. Graham froze. My grandfather reached into his suit pocket. He pulled out a simple, folded piece of paper, a spare name card, blank. He then pulled a heavy, gold fountain pen from his breast pocket. Uncapping it, he spread the card on the table and, with deliberate, elegant strokes, wrote a single name. "Riley." He placed the card at the head of the table. "That," he said, "is where she sits." He turned to me. "Riley, join us." I did not move. I stayed standing, watching this unfold. Marla stood beside me, her arms crossed. Vivian, seeing her authority, her home, her entire world collapsing, made one last, desperate attempt at normalcy. She picked up her crystal water goblet, her hand trembling so violently the water shivered. "This is," she began, her voice a reedy, thin whisper. "This is still Thanksgiving, and family. Family is the most important. Family is above all." She tried to raise the glass in a toast. "Family," I said, my voice cutting across the table. "Begins with respect. You do not banish family to a garage. You do not steal from them. You do not build a home on the back of someone you despise." "You," Vivian began, but the doorbell rang. It was not a polite, neighborly ring. It was a firm, impatient, 3-second-long press. Graham jumped, spilling his wine. "Who is that? I told you, no one—" "I will get it," Calvin said. We heard him walk to the front hall. We heard the heavy door open. We heard a crisp, female voice. "Mr. Hart, thank you for calling." Calvin returned. He was not alone. Tessa Rowan walked into the dining room. She was in a black pantsuit, carrying a heavy, hard-sided briefcase. She looked like a surgeon arriving for an emergency operation, and she was followed by another man, in a cheap suit, carrying his own briefcase. "Good evening," Tessa said, her eyes sweeping the table. She looked at me and nodded once. Riley, Calvin, Marla. Then she looked at the terrified faces of my family. Vivian Hart, Graham Hart, Sloan Hart, Cameron Price. She named them like a prosecutor. "My name is Tessa Rowan. I am Riley Hart's legal counsel." It is Thanksgiving," Graham stammered. "You cannot be here. We said tomorrow, at your office." "You said that," Tessa agreed, setting her briefcase on the mahogany sideboard. "But I have found that in cases of felony fraud, tomorrow gives guilty parties a lot of time to bleach hard drives, empty accounts, and destroy evidence. My client's interests are best served by securing a resolution tonight." The man beside her stepped forward. "I am Mr. Fields," he said, his voice nervous. "I am a notary public." Tessa clicked open her briefcase. It was full of documents, thick, intimidating, ribbon-bound documents. "This," she said, pulling out the first stack, "is the final settlement agreement. You have all been served this evening, in person. The terms are not negotiable. They are, in fact, an act of mercy." She laid them out, one for Graham, one for Vivian, one for Sloan, one for Cam. "You will repay all fraudulent charges, all extorted funds. You will liquidate the assets to do so, the cars, the jewelry, this house. You will sign a binding no-contact order." "And," Calvin said, "you will sign the addendum." Tessa pulled out a final single sheet of paper. "The addendum," she said, "brought to my attention by Mr. Calvin Hart. It pertains to the Clementine Trust." Vivian's head snapped up. This was the true terror. "Calvin, no," Graham whispered. "Dad, please, that is my future. That is all I have left." "You have nothing left, Graham," Calvin said, his voice heavy with a final, crushing sorrow. "The trust has been restructured, effective immediately." You gave it to her," Vivian shrieked, pointing at me. "You gave it all to the one who tore us apart." "I did not," Calvin said. "I would not be so foolish. Riley does not need my money. She earns her own." He looked at me, then back at my father. "The addendum states," Calvin announced to the room, "that the Clementine Trust is no longer a simple inheritance. It is now a charitable fund, and the sole moral executor, the person with the power to approve or deny any request, the person who will manage its ethical distribution, is Riley." Graham stared. He did not understand. "It means, Graham," Calvin clarified, "that she is not your replacement. She is your new banker. It means that for the rest of your life, if you want $1, for medicine, for food, for rent, you will have to do what she has been forced to do for you. You will have to ask. You will have to beg. And she," he said, looking at me, "will have the absolute, ironclad, legal authority to say no." My father made a sound, a low, guttural sound, like a man who had been punched in the stomach. He finally understood. The safety net was not just gone. It had been turned into his cage. "Now," Tessa said, clicking her pen. "Sign." She pushed the first document, the repayment and no-contact agreement, toward Vivian. Vivian's hand was shaking so badly she could not take the pen. I can't. You can, Tessa said, her voice like steel. Or I can call Detective Miller. He is on standby. He is very interested in the IP address logs from your router. Mrs. Hart, the choice is yours. Sign. And this remains a civil matter. Refuse, and you will be in a holding cell by midnight. Vivian, weeping, took the pen. Her signature, usually a perfect, looping script, was a jagged, ugly scratch. Sloane was next. She was completely dissociated, her eyes blank. She signed the document that relinquished all financial claims without even reading it. She had checked out. Then, Cam, I should not be here, he stammered, pushing the paper away. I am not family. This is between. I am leaving. He stood up. Sit down. Mr. Price, Tessa said, her voice bored. She did not even look up. You are a named co-conspirator in the Cam and Sloane LLC bank fraud. You are an accessory. Your email to Vivian is what we call Exhibit A. You can sign this acknowledgement, which cuts your ties and confirms your testimony. Or you can be arrested with them. I really do not care which. Cam paled. He sat down. He signed the paper so fast he almost tore it. Graham was last. He stared at the signature line. He looked at Calvin. Calvin was looking at the ceiling. He looked at me. I looked through him. He signed his life's work, his father's name, his daughter's future. He signed it all away. The notary, Mr. Fields, stepped forward, his hands shaking, and began the laborious process of stamping and countersigning every single page. As he worked, a high, shrill ding pierced the air. The oven timer, the dessert. The sound broke the spell. Calvin Hart stood up. He walked to the sideboard, where the magnificent, untouched turkey still sat. He picked up the heavy, stag-handled carving knife. He walked back to the head of the table, and with a single, violent motion, he raised the knife and plunged it, point first, deep into the wooden carving board. It stuck there, quivering, like a thrown weapon. The sound was a final, heavy thud. Tonight, Calvin Hart said, his voice shaking with a century of fury and principle, it is over. This family's tradition of disrespecting its own blood ends. I looked at the chaos, at my weeping stepmother, my broken father, my hollowed-out sister. I did not feel joy. I did not feel triumphant. I did not clap. I did not smile. I felt quiet, the great roaring engine of their need, which had been my soundtrack for 3 long years, had finally, mercifully, gone silent. I walked to the head of the table. I pulled out the heavy oak chair, the one with my name card in front of it, the chair they had denied me, and I sat down. The terrified caterer, seeing a gap, crept in, holding a pumpkin pie. Dessert? She whispered. As she put the plates down, Tessa's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, her expression sharp. She answered. Rowan? She listened, her eyes fixed on Vivian. Yes, that is correct. He has been trying to buy it for months. The owners are newly motivated. Vivian's head lifted, her face a mask of confusion. Yes, Tessa continued. The all-cash offer is accepted, 20% over asking. We are delighted. She paused. The condition? Yes, that is acceptable. She looked directly at Vivian, who was holding a dessert fork. He wants the keys in 2 weeks, before Christmas. Vivian froze. Her mouth was open. The fork, with a small piece of pie, stopped halfway to her lips. It was done. The house was gone. The money was gone. The future was gone. The knot was, at last, undone. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Where in the world are you listening from? Let us know in the comments below so we can chat and share our thoughts. Please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and give us extra support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.